could be any time now, so. I can. And welcome to any new faces who have tuned in. A quick reminder that all of today's content will be available to view on demand over the next 24 to 48 hours. Up next, we've got our third leaders debate of today's event, Driving Cultural Change. Whenever we talk about equality, diversity and inclusion within the rail industry, it simply isn't enough to make token changes or empty gestures. We have to tackle issues and inclusivity of our organisations from their very core. Now, this often means adapting and maturing company culture. And when we say that, we don't necessarily mean the existing culture is bad, rather that we should always strive to be building on our progress and opening more doors, because the more voices we can add to our collective experience, the more reflective and appreciative we can be of our communities. So to help me discuss how we can drive positive and effective cultural change within our organisations, I'm delighted to be joined by Horseman Sewell, CEO of First Class Partnerships, Nasir Khan, co-founder of Muslims in Rail, and Michelle Rodgers, president of RMT, the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers. Our panellists, as I'm sure you can imagine, offer an interesting snapshot into the industry and how we support our rich, diverse rail workforce to build a lasting culture within their organisations, which reflects themselves, their colleagues and their communities. If you have any questions for our panellists during the talk, please take advantage of the live Q&A function, which the team from RTM will be monitoring, and I'll try and put as many questions to us as possible. Click on them when any questions are coming in. So welcome to all of my panellists. Michelle, let's start off with you, if we may. What does a diverse culture mean to you?
It's a very, very good question. I just want to start by saying that the words diverse, equality and inclusion are three very simple words to say. However, they're very difficult to deliver, not just for the rail union that I belong to, but for companies also. And I think that we all have to be mindful and step up. And we really have to push forward now, because for many, many years, we've let people down that belong to these diverse groups. And my own rail union, I would say 2/3 of the membership belong to some form of equality group. So we have strived as a trade union to make sure that we include and have our own equality groups for women, for our Black and ethnic members, for our disabilities, and for our LGBT members, because the way we learn is to listen to them that experience. And so as a trade union, I think that companies should and could involve themselves a lot more with the trade union movements they engage with, but more so with their own people that they employ. And I think when we've got a combined, joined up communication between everybody, then our own experiences and knowledge will become much faster, and the rate that we actually grow and learn will be much better. And the key thing in all of this is to listen. We're all very good at talking, but none of us really listen. And I think that's key for me about my experience as being the national president for the RMT, is that listening to our members has certainly broadened my aspect of understanding the people that are involved in the equality issues that we are going to discuss today.
Listening is so key, she says, as I try to interrupt you there, not meaning to, but just because we're on a virtual platform. And also, I really admire your honesty, Michelle, which we'll explore later, that you feel we've let people down. And I think you're absolutely right there. Nasir, I'd like to bring you into the conversation next. I mean, during on your 20 years experience of delivering large infrastructure projects and your role as co-founder of Muslims in Rail, I mean, how important is a diverse culture to you and customers, and do you feel like Michelle that perhaps we've let some people down?
I couldn't agree more, and thank you for having me here. I think we are now at a spectrum of diversity and inclusion where we have to move beyond just policies and strategies. We definitely need an action plan. We definitely need some more performance targets rather than just talk. And this is where I think we come in. We are asking questions to people because we know that, diversity explains complex issues in a way that it becomes easier to understand. So it's very much into that phase now where organizations need to look at the interest of not only their own people, but also the customers that they deliver their services to. And together, if we understand and create a culture where we understand the diversity of the people we are serving and match it with the diversity of the people who are delivering that service, that's where we need to be. Those are the targets that we ought to aspire to.
And Ian, in your view, what are the benefits that a diverse culture brings?
So they're almost unending, because we're trying to build an infrastructure and a railway that responds both from a passenger and a workforce point of view, that handles and responds to everyone's requirements and wishes. And the reality is, at this time of coming out of COVID, governments around the world, and we see this in our work around the world, are making major commitments to invest in infrastructure and railways in particular. And the only way that infrastructure and those operations will be delivered is if we tap into all corners of society for the skills and experience that those corners offer. And we're not doing that yet. We're having point successes in parts of society, but there's so much further to go. And I'm seeing, different experiences around the world, but there's really, really exciting best practice happening. And one of our challenges is to make sure it's shared.
From just sticking with you for a moment, Ian, from your advisory work that you do all over the world, do you have any examples that you might be able to share with us about, what the rail industry could do to build a more diverse and inclusive workforce?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I was listening earlier to one of the sessions about how the industry tends to be dominated by people who've been in it for a long time and for sometimes for decades, and they're key decision makers. The reality is, though, that we need people who are new to this industry as much as we need people who've been in it forever. And the industry can be a pretty daunting place, both for workforce and for passengers, partly because of its complexity, partly because of the risks involved. A really good example is something that's very topical, which is the maintenance of rolling stock. It's been in the news a lot recently. It's a very complex task, and at the moment it's set up perhaps so that only certain sectors of the workforce can address it as a career opportunity. We're working with rolling stock manufacturers who are seeing that as an opportunity to change the way things are maintained, so that people from all backgrounds, whether it's from or in terms of their physical and position in life, can join that work. At the moment, we tend to exclude people from that kind of work. We need to include people in that work, and we're doing really interesting work just down in Kent right now on how we can change the way maintenance of rolling stock is done and make it an addressable career for lots more people.
I'm sure that's refreshing news to you, Michelle. I mean, as a union, how do you challenge employers to ensure that they take action to improve the diversity of their workforce and ensure that there is equal treatment for all of your members?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because a lot of employees don't necessarily like the trade unions challenging them, and that in itself becomes an issue. So we don't need to hide from the elephant in the room. However, as a trade union movement, I think that, and Ian said it, we have new people continually joining the trade union movement, so they have fresh ideas, and they're the people that we listen to as a trade union movement. And so when we're coming to the table to negotiate, it's not because somebody that's and I'm going to use this word, male, bald and stale, is sitting at the top of the tree dictating down to the membership. Our union is very unique in that it's membership led, so it's from the bottom up. So our members tell us the issues that they have. And it's interesting when he talked about his campaign down in Kent to involve more women in the industry. The European Trade Union has actually got a project ongoing at the moment called Women in Rail. However, I know some of you will be aware of it. However, it's a very difficult progress, because what's stopping that from really taking hold and really taking off is the people that are involved higher up. So the HR departments, the CEOs that are frightened sometimes to let go of tried and tested methods. So we have to push and we have to challenge. And we have to not to be frightened, because the only way we really learn is by testing it. And if it doesn't work, then we should hold our head up high and say we trialed that. However, that wasn't fit for what we required, and we have to go back to something different. But because we've done that, we don't then throw out the person that was in that role, depending on what culture they were from or what background they were from, and say they're no fit for the purpose. We find them another role, because the rail industry is huge, and there's space for everybody. And I think the real damage we're doing to the trade union at the moment is attacking us and reducing the jobs that are actually out there. I listened to a session earlier when we talked about access. You know, access can only truly be sought when there's people there to give that access. So when somebody turns up, they want to see a person. When somebody's on that train, they want to engage a person. You know, we can't keep isolating ourselves. And gadgets are great, by the way, but there's nothing that beats a face-to-face session. And that should be from everybody. And that shouldn't matter what background you're from, what your difficulties are. That should be an inclusion for everyone. When we talk about engaging, we should be engaging across the spectrum, but not be frightened from trying. Because unless we try, we're not going to achieve. And for my trade union, that is definitely the push that we've currently got on, is that it's people that make an industry and not apps and not infrastructure. And it was interesting how Ian started his conversation off with infrastructure and how much money is spent on it. And where we truly miss the boat is we don't spend and invest enough in people. So sometimes it's just a tick box because it gives them a little star at the top of whatever tree they're trying to climb to. So we've got to address that, and we've got to address it quickly. Otherwise, we're going to lose something in this century that we're never going to get back. And I think that will be remiss in all of us.
I think you're right. I think people are at the heart, and your members are at the coalface. So I think you're very good at test, which we can come on to later about how the thinking about them on culture. But Nasir, how important is it that recruitment practices support cultural change, and that also it comes right down from the top?
It's the ultimate goal to have recruitment practices make the change, cultural change. I mean, I'm not convinced at all that we are doing enough at the moment. Let me give you some examples. I mean, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of the efforts and things you see is about gender. It's about sexual orientation. We are still not doing enough about disability. We're still not doing about race. We're still not doing about religion. Two things very important. One is the social mobility issue with recruitment practices at all levels. The second thing is the pay gap. Now, Network Rail, as one of the biggest employers within the rail industry, published its ethnicity pay gap report. Gender pay gap is published by law. It's a statutory requirement. But Network Rail, by its own choice, published its ethnicity pay gap, still 10%. That is a lot higher than the UK average of 2.5%. And that's me giving you an example of the rail industry. Okay, so we need to look at those issues as well. Now, when you come to recruitment practices, I know this has changed now, but I'll give you an example. Apprentices, say 16 to 19-year-olds coming in, applying for apprenticeship jobs, there are several ways you are recruiting them. And this is where cultural change needs to happen with the recruitment practice. And I'll give you an example. If you're asking apprentices, did you volunteer before? Okay, and the apprentice, 16, 17-year-old says no. And if that's taken into account for their recruitment process as a negative, that's a problem. I come from social mobility background. Doing volunteering at that age was the last thing on my parents' mind, because I've been working since I was 16. Need to earn money. Forget about volunteering. Now I'm doing volunteering because I can. So if you're asking from people from social mobility background in your recruitment practices, you've killed diversity and inclusion there and then. You've got no chance of getting more diverse people. That's just one example. Then you're talking about video interviews because of COVID and all that. I may have a different accent from the norm, but that is what diversity is all about. I may come across, but I'm passionate about it. That's why I always speak like that. And this is where the problem is, that cultural change need to happen not only in our recruitment practices, the questions that we are asking, we need to think about it from the perspective of the people who are, going to be affected by it, not how I feel about it. I may have different circumstances now to the ones I'm dealing with. And if real change needs to happen, we need to do this. I've not seen any real progress in this area. And I'm really appalled how things are still. I mean, I've just given you an example of ethnicity pay gap. And then you look at the statistics of people having promotion within the same job grade. And the thing that Muslims in Rail and all those things started back in 2017 was because when I was going into senior leaders meeting, I generally found myself as the only one in the top 100 or something like that. And I'm like, where are all the others? And that's why the whole thing about Muslims in Rail started, to connect, grow, and inspire people who are working in the industry or who want to come in and work in the industry. Because it's all about giving the role models. It's all about showing that there are people who look like you, It's not just, I don't want to say it.
Nasir, your passion is clear. And I'm sure that if we had longer, you'd be able to explain probably quite an extraordinary journey that you've gone on. I'm sure your personal journey is extraordinary. Nasir's talking about some of the barriers there. Which barriers do you think we're failing to get over? And, does some of what Nasir says there ring true with you?
Well, we're all creatures of our own experiences, aren't there? And my passion in this, and Nasir talked about disability, is whether it's in the workforce or in our customer population, our passengers and stakeholders, is catering for all impairments, frankly. And the really exciting thing in today's world is that we know now statistically that diversity works. And it's a good example to say one of the other things that I think other people have touched on, which is we benefit so much by bringing people in from other walks of life. It's ironic, isn't it, that we've chosen two people right at the top of our industry to help change our industry, in part because they've had experience in other industries. Both Keith Williams and Andrew Haynes have had time in the aviation industry, which has strengths and weaknesses in this area, but it's comparative experience to learn from. But my point is that diversity works. And in the area of physical and cognitive impairments, and we all have some degree of this, there's now proof perfect. If you go to the automotive industry, Ford designs its cars for all sorts of physical and cognitive impairments, from color blindness to the 17% of the population that has problems with its hands and arms. It designs them for all of them. And guess what? More people who are able-bodied by them as a result. There's a really great example for all of those, and Helen, you're sitting in a kitchen. There's a company called Oxo Good Grips. An engineer with a wife with arthritis saw his wife struggling to cook with ordinary utensils. He designed some new utensils with good grips that work for her. Guess what? We all buy them now because they're better, because they're built for diversity. So we know there's statistics and data and fact out there that shows that diversity works. And I want us, and this is what we're doing around the world, to make sure, whether it's in the workforce or in passengers, to cater for all people. We've done a lot of work on PRM around making sure that through level boarding and other things that people in wheelchairs can travel more easily. But we're only just scratching the surface. As I said, another good statistics, 15% of the population has memory and concentration problems. What that means is, the real example here is, if I'm one of those people and I turn up at an airport with a paging departure board where they change the pages to show the flights, I might never find my flight on that board. That's an airport not thinking about full diversity. And we know, as I say, that diversity works. So there are examples all over the world. We just need to learn from them and implement them. And it does come from the top, but some of it's, we've got to drive education. People need to know that, yes, of course, we've got to deal with the 0.6% of the population that's blind, but there's a much bigger percent of the population, including those people that have got vision issues and find it to be a barrier from using the railway or indeed working in the railway.
I look like I'm distracted. I'm not distracted, I promise you. I'm looking at the Q&A, and the Q&A is like heating up on my side of the computer. So I think if we kick off, actually, if we may, with you, Michelle, I think Tina would like all of you to make a contribution to this question. She's asking all of you, have you seen any companies within the industry? Oh, now it's flicked and I've lost her. Hang on, let me find her. Oh, the joys of virtual events. For all of you, have you seen any companies within the industry who have made positive changes over just ticking a star? And what is it that they've done that others could learn from? That question's coming from Tina, and maybe we can start off with you, Michelle.
Look, let's not forget we have made strides. In the last 10 years, the industry has changed massively. However, I think the industry has lost sight of what it's really about. And this, for me, is quite heartbreaking, because we're now focusing, and people are not going to, I'm not going to be popular for saying this amongst people, but we now focus on tick boxes. So it's all about returning profits. It's all about getting trains to run on time. And we've forgotten the real need of the railway. The real need of the railway is to serve the people. And I think that's something we've got to get back to. I mean, Ian has been mentioning statistics. I asked a question earlier on, but we know, we've actually got facts and figures that there's 50% of stations that have staff, and only 11% of them are fully staffed 24/7. That's shameful in today's world. Today's world, where crime is rising dramatically, where people are feeling more and more unsafe, we're looking at removing people. The other industry downfall I think we're making is we're not bringing people in-house. Outsourcing has grown massively across the rail industry, and that is because it's a cost-saving exercise. That is something else that is letting us down. Nasir hit on a point where he said about apprentices. Women, I mentioned it myself, women in rail, black and ethnic members, disabled members, can all be utilised in trains. In one of the earlier sessions, it said for every £1 spent on training, the industry gets £3 back. We talk about railways and careers for life. However, that's not the case anymore, because what we're now doing in the industry is employing people that have already had a career. And we're employing them people because we think they're already moulded into something that we want. And that is somebody that's not going to challenge, that's not going to speak up, and is not going to question what the industry is doing. And we've got to get back to the basics, because the basic is the railway industry is to move people from A to B. And that should always be remembered. It's a community service. And when we start making it about money, we've lost sight of what we're really about. So Kim is right. We haven't made enough gains. I don't think there's anybody could really give themselves a gold star for what they've achieved across equality and inclusion. However, we must remember that we're learning. We are still learning. However, those that are in control have to take the bull by the horns, like I said earlier. They have to try things. And if we fail, then we fail trying, and we learn together. And I think that's the big question here, is we have to learn together.
So I won't move to the other two on that, because we're getting so many questions in. So if I move to you, Nasir, Rhonda's saying that she agrees with you about social mobility, which masks a lot of barriers in society as a whole. And she's wondering if you feel apprentices, which I'm sure you'll say are a very positive step forward on this.
Is that to me again?
Agrees with you about social mobility, and asks about, you know, whether you feel apprenticeships are a positive step forward.
Of course, apprenticeships is a positive step forward, especially in social mobility spectrum, because not everybody likes to take student loan. And specifically talking about Muslim communities, and I've had these discussions with certain people, and I've actually given them advice. A student loan comes with interest, and a lot of Muslim communities don't want to deal with interest and loan. So apprenticeship is automatically their way forward. I mean that's just one thing. I mean, the other aspect that I want to talk about is very much diversity and inclusion. We've talked about it quite a lot, but we also need to talk about the systematic issue with inequality, because this is where, you know, my whole perspective comes in. So as I said, the example, the apprenticeships really help, because it creates a buffer where we have some inequalities, where people cannot go to universities, where they can't take student loans, where there is interest issues. Same is with the systematic effect that is taking with anti-racism avenues. And I would like to mention here that there is a difference between the Black Lives Matter type movement And there is a difference between improving diversity and inclusion, because diversity and inclusion, we've talked about, it's the 9 protected characteristics. Whereas when you look at something like Black Lives Matter, what it is about is looking at the systematic racism and inequalities. I'll give you an example of STEM volunteering. I mean, I do a lot of work with areas, with council states, etc. How much STEM volunteering happens there? How many people actually go in those schools and give career advice? And this is where diversity and inclusion needs to benefit, again, social mobility, diverse areas, because they don't have that reach. They don't have those budgets. How much of that happens in those areas? So I think this is where we need to go in and not just talk about diversity and inclusion, but talk about how do we cater for inequalities.
Black Lives Matters there. It's a subject close to my heart. It was a year yesterday. I'm sure you'll already know that iconic photograph of a man who I'm proud to say that on his charity now and has become a great friend of mine, Patrick Hutchinson, the black man who was pictured by Reuters lifting a white man to safety and effectively saving his life. Not that the man has ever said thank you, but that's another story. Nasir, what do you think BLM has taught us about culture change, and what lessons can we take even from that event, that we all saw worldwide a year ago?
I think it just follows on, as I mentioned, that the exclusion of Black people or people of color from benefiting from opportunities that are afforded to others. Now, a lot of people say, oh, you see a lot of diversity here, a lot of Black people, say station staff. I'm giving you an example. You'll see a lot of diverse staff there. Yes, great. But this is where I find challenges. There is a lot of diversity, but at lower grades, at lower levels. Blue collar, at the coalface.
Yes.
I go in, have meetings with senior executives and anywhere else, and this is where my problem comes in. I generally find myself as the lone voice, and somebody coming up from a different background, different brought up. I've always got a different idea to other people, and this is what diversity brings in. So I think when we say, oh, there is a lot of diversity and inclusion, I see a lot of Black people here, I see a lot of Asians, I see a lot of, the generic word used, which kills everything, calling it BAME, BAME, to define a catch-all for everything. I mean, D&I isn't mature enough yet to tackle the roots of racism and inequality.
Correct.
D&I has proven to be most successful when establishing a clear defined targets and splits in recruiting, in pay gap, in seniority, in the senior execs. Now, how many of FTSE 100 can now say, oh, we've got women on our board? Great, clapping, fantastic. Is that really a thing to say nowadays? And then I'll ask, how many people from color, how many Black, how many Asians, how many ethnic minority are represented?
Yes. And
this is where the problem is. I mean, we need to drive change through accountability, through collective accountability, to look at, everything around. I think the key question comes in here is, we just had census few months ago, 2021. I would really like to see the results of it, where we are on active workforce, because the census will actually define how many people are then in managerial state, supervisory state, or just worker state. And this is where you will say if we have 25% ethnic minority in the UK, how many of those 25% are actually then classed into all those different levels? And I can see from my experience, a higher percentage will be in the lower ranked divisions.
I'm just going to stop you there only because we're really running out of time. So I want to bring Ian in and Michelle before we finish. This debate will definitely be a day-long debate, I think. Listening to Nasir there, and you really do feel that, women are being counted, people from, BAME background are being counted. It's a shame that we're like this in society, but, that's where we are at the minute, and we need to make great progress. There's been a lot written around teamwork at the heart of all these changes planned for UK rail. But what other specific areas of cultural change do you think we need to highlight as being essential if Keith Williams's recommendations are actually going to be realised? Oh, I've lost Ian's microphone there. Ian, sorry, Ian, we lost you there. Just start again if you would.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
I think a lot of this is about looking outside rail. I agree with other panelists' views that there's a long way to go in certain areas, but we should also celebrate success in other industries. I think of yesterday's fantastic announcement for Sunderland that the Qashqai 3 is going to be built by Nissan in the northeast. And actually all of the coverage that I saw was about how Nissan is going out into the kinds of communities that Nasir is talking about and trying to foster and foment social mobility and get young girls to think about being engineers, not other roles, to get people from all sorts of backgrounds to consider a career in engineering and manufacturing. So I think there are things that we can look to in other industries and transferring people in from those industries rather than prioritizing people that are necessarily time-served railway personnel. I think we need a balance of that. I think we need both. And I also think that I'm going to kind of struggle to agree with everything that Michelle says about the public-private balance, but there's strength in both and good kind of hot spots of success. If I look at what, for instance, Hitachi are doing to ensure that the way they build a train is truly inclusive, that lots of people can take part in it, whether it's their background, their physical or cognitive abilities. There are real hotspots of success. Our issue is building that out across the industry. And so we've got to share, we've got to see what's going on internationally. We work, for instance, in Canada, in Toronto, and massively, one of North America's most diverse cities. The Transport Authority in Toronto, Metrolinx, is doing amazing things about building diversity in its workforce. They've just finished an extraordinary Black History Week in Metrolinx. And so there are beacons that we can look to, both inside and outside rail, but we kind of need to lift our eyes up to the horizon and communicate about these things and show senior leaders what's possible and come back to my point, which is diversity works.
Michelle, I literally have run over on this panel, so I'm going to be naughty and just add a minute. Okay. You've got a minute just to respond and give us your final thoughts and wrap it up for us, please, Michelle, if you would.
Very, very quickly, because there was so much said there that I'd like to answer. But the key is education and action. Okay, the rail delivery group, whether we like it or not, has to take responsibility. It has to. It's now running our railways, and it has to take responsibility for these tick boxes that are not actually being done in the manner that they're expected to be done. And I know Network Rail are currently sending all their managers on a racism course. What does that say about our industry? And that is because of cases we've had to take as a trade union movement to the tribunal courts. So we're letting our industry down, and we're letting our people down that work in the industry. And very quickly, Hitachi are doing a great job. Let's give them a big clap. However, the private-public sector balance has to stop, because the only way the rail industry is really going to grow is when it's got true investment. And that is investment that's made from the sale of tickets. And we know it's many billions of pounds is put back into the system, and put back into the system to educate. And Nasir, you were absolutely 100% spot on, because we have a lot of Black and ethnic, disabled and women members amongst our trade union movement. And the majority of them are in low paid, outsourced jobs. And that is something the industry has to take responsibility for. And as somebody that's been in this industry for over 30 years, that has many, many times been the only woman in a room around the negotiating table, that has to stop. So 100%, Nasir, I agree with you. Ian, there's still a lot to do. There's backslapping that can be done, but it has to be done in the right formatting. And we're a million miles away from actually achieving what we should be achieving. And that is a rounded, well-diverse, well-inclusive railway system for everybody, be you a member of the public or be you a member of that workforce. Thank you, Helen.
You can see that I'm getting into trouble now. I hope, Nasir, Ian and Michelle, I feel there's so much more I wanted to explore with you, but time is always against us when we have virtual days like this. So promise me that you'll all come back and take part in our next event. It was brilliant to see you. Thank you very much for your time. Now, we did have a few gremlins in the system earlier, but now we're going to attempt now to welcome back one of our keynote speakers. It won't be one of in. It'll be Patrick Craven at City and Guilds. Patrick's going to be talking about the opportunities that their organisation or his organisation has been able to create, and the training that's helped provide to reduce skill gaps within the UK rail workforce. There are huge areas to build on rail, particularly around skills and ED&I, which City and Guilds Back on Track report highlighted. For example, only 16% of the workforce are female. And we've learned a few times today that every £1 spent on training on rail skills in the UK results in a £3 return on investment. Impressive figures. And so hopefully the tech gods will be with us this time as I confidently hand you over to Patrick Craven.
Thank you. Hopefully take two will work this time. Also perfectly happy to wait on the back of such a passionate debate. And I think it's really, for me, I think it's commendable for the industry that they collectively as an industry are open to that richness of debate, because that for me highlights the value of diversity and inclusion. You have to open up to people's opinions, people's debate, and it's set that everyone will have a different view on matters, and it's the collection of those things which has the real power. I'm just going to speak really, I guess, about and referencing our report. I don't know if we're actually, yeah, we've got the report coming up now. What we are going to do is I am going to record a session speaking to my colleague Martin, Managing Director at Technical Training, who's going to, and then we'll provide that as an asset for the conference, so that you can see that richer debate that comes out of that. For those people who aren't familiar with City and Guilds, we're an organisation that's been around for well over 140 years. Now, and stimulated, I guess, by the first industrial revolution and the changes that brought with it. But we're very much, our purpose is about helping people into work, developing work, and move on to progression in work, which is, I think, a subject that was highlighted there about that levelling up agenda, giving people all an opportunity to progress in work. It's focused on secure and sustained employment, strengthening organisations who see the value in workforce development, and ultimately a skilled and productive society that it leads towards. The report itself, the Back on Track report, if we go on to the next slide, is in the marketplace brochure asset session if you want to download a copy there. We produced this actually at the back end of 2020, and even then our chairman, Sir John Armitt, was calling out the tremendous opportunity that existed within the rail infrastructure sector to really act as a catalyst for re-engaging employment, getting people back into work, getting people to think about different careers, the demand that was going to be required for quality jobs in the sector. We've got the reference there as well from the NSAR about that investment. And I think that's the kind of thing, we'll always have debate about the balance between public and private sector, but I think sometimes comments like that are helpful in catalysing that sort of private sector recognition when they see a return on investment with the sorts of commitment to training that we're very much here to support. Next slide just gives a bit of background, I guess, to the methodology. We surveyed about 2,000 plus working age adults, did some work with NSR and labour market information organisations as well. Highlighted, I guess, that disproportionate impact of the amount of male people employed in the sector, and things like that are very difficult to address in the short term because they're things which are more cultural and needs a collective engagement to change views on things like that. Also, what it started to highlight was an ageing workforce as well. And I think some comments have made already in the conference today about ways in which things like that can change. Our vision is very much about a world in which everyone has the skills and opportunities to succeed, and there really are no barriers to that. Now, that might be quite idealistic, but it is a vision that we commit ourselves to, and we try and support that in all the sectors that we work for. If we look at some of the findings from the report on the next slide, the first area that highlighted was some of the high-level challenges, and 4 areas there. I think there was definitely an issue around an ageing workforce and a potential retirement cliff edge. 28% of workers in the rail industry are 51 or over, set to lose huge numbers of skilled workers over the next few years. I think there's also retention issues, but the retention issues I think are wrapped up in some of the comments that have been made already today about the way in which people recognise or not the value of working in a sector where there is an obvious career path for them and an opportunity for them to develop, and some of the changes there that I think were being touched on around some of the changes for the type of workforce profile that's been introduced and things that need to change, that reliance on contract workers, overseas talent. I think one of the things that we are aware of is that beneath the pandemic challenge, I guess to a certain extent, the creeping impact of Brexit has been forgotten for a while, but that will return for many sectors, and it will return linked to immigration laws as well. And so there's very much a need for us to think very differently about where the new workforce is going to come from, and a whole range of reputational issues, I think, sometimes valid and sometimes misconceptions about what the rail sector has to offer. And certainly the viewpoint that our colleagues in Intertrain, part of our technical training workforce, have been doing is they see their role as really trying to turn the dial on how you can ensure that you get a much more diverse range of young people and also adults who are looking to switch careers interested in the rail sector. And we've made the comment, I think, a few times today where, you know, we don't see enough diversity, certainly at higher levels in organisations. But equally, sometimes when I'm speaking to recruiting departments, they'll say, well, part of the problem as well is that we don't get a sufficient range of diversity of application. So therefore, if we don't get the range of applicants, it's quite difficult to change some of the recruiting practice as well. So, you know, I'm a firm believer in that people often can be what they can see. And within our Intertrain group, we've made a very active engagement in making sure that we've got a richness of personnel who are involved in training, and that's both female, Black, Asian, other ethnic minority groups, who are therefore representing to other people what it means to be attracted to work in the sector. And hopefully we'll start to see that pay dividends as well. Some big initiatives taking place in London and Birmingham areas to really start to address the profile that the sector is given. We see that, I mean, just 16% of the workforce are female, and I'd be willing to bet that actually that 16% are also employed in certain stereotypical roles as well within the industry. And these are all things that collectively I think we have to step up and try and change. The next slide talks about awareness and perceptions of the sector. And what's very telling here is that the findings shine a light on how the rail industry is perceived generally by the public. Perhaps the most striking finding is the lack of appeal for a lot of the more diverse talent pool. It's not seen as a desirable sector to work in, especially amongst women, young adults, people from Black, Asian or minority ethnic communities. And overall, people don't really know enough about the industry and assume they don't have the skills or aptitude to work in the sector. Now, for me, a lot of this challenge begins in schools. It begins in employer engagement with schools and raising the profile and visibility of a diverse workforce that therefore attracts a more diverse range of applicants. One of the pieces of work that we're doing around the pandemic is called the Skills Bridge work, and what we're doing there is showing people that just because they've been displaced from some industries doesn't mean that they don't have an opportunity to think about career changes, and letting them see the underlying skills that they have, which might actually be applicable in different occupations, gives them the confidence to think about going and working in different occupations. And we can link that kind of work and those programs to ensure that we're also helping the rail industry recruit the sorts of diverse talent that it's going to need in the next few years and decades to come. Tackling the pressing problems, if we move on to the next slide, I guess is one of our key areas of focus. And the research highlighted three key problems that need to be addressed. There's a lack of awareness of careers in rail. I think when often people think about rail, they tend to gravitate to those things that they experience as a commuter or as a consumer of rail as a travel medium. They're not aware of other roles that are available in the sector. Perceptions related to unsociable working practices, I think, sometimes persist. And certainly there's a recurring theme around job security, progression and training, investing in workforce and showing all personnel that they have a career path opportunity. If the industry is going to attract new talent, it'll need to understand how to engage and appeal to a more diverse talent pool. You'll see here one of the images is actually, I guess, an indication of the fact that, like many industries, we're moving towards greater electrification, different fuel types being used. And these things, I think, will change the nature of what it means to work in the sector, the kinds of maintenance, the types of skills that are required. Network Rail's been doing some great stuff around a program Just Like Me. trying to inspire girls and young women to explore engineering as a career. City and Guilds as a body, we've got a strong footprint in the engineering sector, particularly with the new T-levels at school and college age, and we equally are going to do our bit to ensure that we're promoting these professions to a diverse range of young people, and offering greater career progression is, I think, a key aspect of that if we're going to attract the right sort of diversity into the sector. The other thing that we looked at was around the rail workforce skills gaps. If you look at the next slide, and again, this was information that came out of a combination of working with NSAR and also with EMSI, a labour market information organisation. And what this starts to do is start to identify the types of roles where we think there will be the greatest demand. And again, we can start to unpack what these roles mean, what the opportunity to engage with those sorts of roles is, and make sure that young people and people who are looking at career switching or reskilling or upskilling at later stages in life are really fully aware of what the opportunities are. We touched earlier on the role of apprenticeships, the role that apprenticeships has to play. One of the biggest changes that we've seen in technical education in recent years is the growing profile and acceptance as apprenticeships as a valid progression for young people. I think for too long in our country, we've been quite wedded to one gold model for progression being GCSEs, A-levels and university. And that only accounts for at best 50% of the younger age population. So therefore it kind of suggests, well, what happens to the other 50%? Are they suddenly forgotten because they don't aspire to that coal path? And clearly that's a nonsense. We have to recognise that there are many ways to get into employment, and apprenticeships now are a key aspect of the way in which young people can progress into very sustainable and meaningful employment. But they have to land connected with employers who recognise that as a valid route into their workforce, and make sure that they support that. And that again is an area of work that Intertrain is very keenly connected into. And again, if you go and look in the brochure area and what we're supporting, you'll see and get more information about that. But I think what I'm trying to highlight here is that collectively, employers, educationalists, and government all have a role to play in terms of investing in and changing perceptions about what it means to come and have a career in rail. So finally, I'm just going to leave you, I guess, with some of the recommendations from the report itself on the next slide, and I guess think about how we might take these recommendations forward. There were 7 recommendations that we highlighted, and hopefully all of these I think will resonate with you in different ways throughout the and certainly from what I've listened to of the conference so far, I've heard many of these themes expressed by many of the speakers. We need to build a lifelong learning commitment into project specifications for National Rail, and this has to start with concepts like apprenticeships. If you're not aware at the moment, there's a new skills bill going through Parliament, and one of the things that will also be highlighting is the potential for something called a lifelong learning entitlement, which I think will then galvanise as well both young people but also older learners into thinking about how they invest in career changes. We need to transform the rail industry into a career destination. So that's not just a first job destination, it's a career destination, and especially give young people that ambition. And young people of whatever background, whatever gender, whatever racial background, all have an equity of ambition when they join the rail sector. Develop strong career paths to attract and retain talent. There's plenty of research out there that actually gives evidence about how investment in workforce can maximise productivity, and that goes back to that investment argument, etc. And a lot of that sort of more private sector view about why it is that you should invest in workforce. I think we also need to make some of that mid-career entry into the industry and skills transfer less frictionless. It needs to be easier for people to make those moves from different industries. It's particularly pertinent at the moment. I don't think, unfortunately, we've seen the end of redundancy yet. I think that will really start to unwind when we see the end of the job retention scheme, and there'll be an awful lot of people who are displaced from industries who are searching for new careers. And why shouldn't the rail sector be an attractive career option for them? That's one of the things that we need to make sure that we shout about. We need to build greater participation at a local and regional level. I'm aware of many of the projects and investments that are taking place around infrastructure, and what a part that has to play in ensuring that we do build back better. And government and relevant partners have to consider how they raise that perception and awareness through a campaign, and we're very willing to join that campaign and that promotion, doing what we can. The other thing I would suggest is that if we're looking to reach out to a new generation, very important, I think, that we use the opportunity to highlight the role of the green agenda in this industry, because that is certainly a principle that I've seen come through from a younger generation. The younger generation are far more, I think, environmentally aware than previous generations, and they will tend to gravitate towards industries and organisations that reflect their views and their values. So I'm going to leave you with those thoughts, the recommendations, and apologies about the glitch earlier on. Really sorry that I didn't have a chance to allow Martin to speak as well, but what we'll do is we'll drop in a recorded session so that you have the chance to pick up that again. And please go and visit the brochure area to download the report. Please also get in touch if we can help with any of that campaign work. And thank you very much for listening.
No, I'm not sure whether I'm back on the main stage. Am I back on the main stage?
I think you might be, Helen. I don't know.
Okay, because I'm still looking. I am on the main stage, so I just wanted to say a very big thank you to Patrick from City and Guilds. And as he said, we're really glad that we got Patrick in the end, and we're sorry we didn't hear from Martin. And yeah, I'd agree with what he said about the younger generation and the green credentials, living with a 12-year-old and 17-year-old. That is right at the top of their agenda. I think it was fantastic to hear from Patrick. So do have a look. Go to his stand and have a chat with Patrick and Martin later if you get a chance. And now there's the perfect time, actually, because up next we have a long lunch. And as well as getting some food, this is your opportunity to delve into the platform's rich functionality. Jump onto the meeting hub and continue building those connections with your fellow delegates. Ever-growing community, and you'll have access to all these tools long after today. So get in there and engage with one another. I think you'll agree we've had some truly amazing speakers already today, and there are more to come this afternoon. But just as innovative and knowledgeable is each and every one of you here today. So don't forget to use your best asset, each other. We also have our expert industry partners on hand to help engage with you within the digital marketplace. And with all of these tools helping earn you points, you could see yourself top of our gamification leaderboard by the end of the day. I'll see you back here at 2 o'clock for the next leaders debate. Until then, enjoy your networking, enjoy your lunch. Thank you.